Welcome back, my dear friend. Let everything slow. Tonight we begin a story that runs alongside another story, told in the same world, with many of the same names, but with one difference at the start that changes everything that follows. There is a land called the Lands Between, a region of mountains and forests and rivers and ancient cities, ruled for an age by a queen who was also a god. Her name was Marika. The thing she ruled with was called the Elden Ring, a great cosmic order through which a power named the Greater Will exerted its design upon the world. The Erdtree stood at the center of all of it, golden and immense, the visible expression of the order that bound the land. In another telling of this world, in the version most listeners will know, the order ended in a particular way. Marika shattered the Elden Ring. The civilization she had built collapsed into war. Her children, the demigods, fought each other for the shards of the ring. The war was without victor. The land was left in ruin. And then, a long time later, the warriors known as the Tarnished were called back by the guidance of grace, and through their journeys, the Lands Between found whatever resolution they would find. This is not that telling. In the telling we are following tonight, the shattering happened the same way. The ring broke, the demigods fought, the war ended without a winner. The land was left in ruin, but the Tarnished were not called back. Grace did not guide them. The Erdtree's failing light reached for something it had reached for before, and this time nothing answered. The world waited in its broken state. The cities stood empty. The roads grew over. The dead lay where they fell. And then, because the world had been left open and waiting, something else arrived to fill the silence. The night came. The coming of the night. It came as weather first, a change in the sky, a low cold pressure that began in the north and moved south across the broken kingdoms. The clouds gathered and did not disperse. The rain began and did not stop. The Lands Between had known many storms in its long history, but this rain was different. It carried more than water. It carried the breath of something old. The rain came to be called the night tide. It fell across the land in long, heavy sheets, washing the grace from the soil, washing the memory from the stones. The Erdtree's roots, already weakened by the shattering, began to rot. The golden light that had touched everything for so long faded under the constant downpour. The world that had been the Lands Between began to become something else. Limveld was the name the new land took. It was the region that had once been Limgrave, the green western edge of the Lands Between, where the old castle stood and the rivers ran to the sea. Under the night's tide, Limgrave became Limveld. The grass darkened, the trees bent and twisted into shapes the land had not produced before. The ruins of the old order remained, recognizable in outline but altered in spirit, the way a face is altered by long grief. The thing that had brought the night was a being. It was called the Nightlord, and the name given to it in the language of the world that was passing away was Heolstor. The word meant something close to a hidden place, or a covering, or a shadow that conceals. The Nightlord was the shape the night took when it needed to act in the world. It was the night's intention given form. Heolstor did not arrive as armies arrive. It did not come riding from the north or marching from the east. It came as the rain came, present everywhere at once, settling into the bones of the land. Where the rain fell, Heolstor was already there. Where the night deepened, Heolstor's reach extended. The Lands Between had been waiting in their broken state, and Heolstor had stepped into the waiting. The land beneath the tide began to change in a more thorough way. The dead did not lie still. The ruins drew creatures into them that had no name yet. The geography itself began to shift, as if the night were rewriting what had been there before. If the tide were not stopped, in time, even the memory of what the lands between had been would wash away. There would be only Limveld. There would be only night. The Roundtable Hold. In the original telling of this world, the Roundtable Hold was a place between places, a way station outside the normal flow of the lands between, accessible through certain rare conditions, where Tarnished, who had risen to a certain station, could meet with other Tarnished, and with the figures who guided them. It existed at a slight remove from the world. The grace inside it was older and stranger than the grace outside. In the version of the world the night had taken, the Roundtable Hold was the one place the tide had not yet reached. It sat at a remove from the broken lands between, accessible by means that the night had not learned to interrupt, sheltered by old powers from a time before the Erdtree had finished its rise. The hold was a stone room with a round table at its center, tapestries on the walls, a high vaulted ceiling, a study off to one side and a garden in another corner. Light came down through openings in the ceiling, soft and unfocused. Neither sun nor moon, but something older than either. The Round Table was the world's last refuge from the night. Because the night could not reach into the hold, the powers that had once governed the lands between were able to use the hold as a base from which to organize a response. Something needed to be done about the night. Someone needed to be called to do it. The hold could call. The first to be called was the priestess. The priestess and the Iron Menial. She had been someone, in the world outside the night, a woman of a particular history, with a particular life and particular skills. The hold called her because the hold needed a center, and she was suited to be that center. When she stepped through into the Round Table, the life she had lived before her arrival began to fade from her, slowly, in the way light fades from a room when the door is closed. The hold required this of her. To be the priestess of the Round Table was to be the hold's anchor, the figure around whom the hold's resistance would be organized, the still point at the center of the table, while the others came and went. She accepted what the role required, including the partial losing of who she had been. The Iron Menial helped her settle in. The Menial brought her food, set up her quarters, suggested a change of attire suited to her new station. The Iron Menial was a being whose origin the lore does not explain in full. It appeared as a small mannequin-like figure, carved and articulated, with the bearing of a careful servant. It tended to the hold. It maintained the rooms, prepared the meals, kept the records, ran the errands that the priestess and the warriors she would soon receive could not run for themselves. The Menial's loyalty to the hold was absolute. Whatever the hold required, the Menial would perform. The priestess sat at the table. The Iron Menial stood at her side. The hold waited for what would come next, which was the calling of the warriors. The calling of the Nightfarers. They were called Nightfarers, the warriors who would be brought to the hold. The name described their condition. They would fare against the night. They would go out from the hold into the Limveld that the tide had made, and they would fight whatever the night had placed there, and they would return to the hold when the fighting was done. The hold did not call them from one place. It called them from across many places, and from many times. A pirate from the coastal waters, a knight from a kingdom of winged people, an assassin from an organization called the Fellowship, a woman who was the daughter of a viscount in a faraway land, a witch of the deep woods, native to the lands between, but native to a part of them that had always been apart, a doll that had once been a girl, a condemned painter from the land of reeds, a warrior whose tribe had been wiped out by the night in a distant home. They had nothing in common, no shared station, no shared era, no shared purpose when they arrived. The opening words of the world they entered described them as brought together by happenstance, bound only by a will. The will to cross the endless night and fight on, until every shred of their being was ground away. The cost of the Hold's calling was significant. To be called as a Nightfarer was to be brought out of the ordinary flow of one's life, into a state that was neither living nor dead, nor any of the conditions the worlds of the lands between recognized. The Nightfarer existed in the Hold, and went out from the Hold and returned, and the going out and returning did things to the Nightfarer that the Nightfarer did not always notice. Memories thinned, the detail of a face, the name of a brother, the shape of a rune one had loved. The forays withered the soul, and the things that had made a soul particular began to come loose. The Hold knew this. The priestess knew it. The Iron Menial knew it. They did not tell the Nightfarers what was happening to them, except in such hints as the Nightfarers could catch on their own. There was no time to grieve over what was being lost. The night was advancing. If the Nightlord were not defeated, in time, there would be nothing left to lose. The forgetting that was the cost of fighting the night was a smaller forgetting than the forgetting the night itself would impose, if it were left to run its course. So the warriors were called. They arrived one by one, summoned by the Hold's strange grace from wherever they had been when the call reached them. The priestess received each of them. The Iron Menial assigned them their quarters. They began to find each other in the rooms of the Hold, these strangers who would now be the only company each other had. The shape of the fight. The fight against the night had a particular shape. The Nightfarers could not march into Limveld in a single great army and meet the Nightlord in open battle. The night did not permit that kind of confrontation. The tide kept Limveld in a state of constant warping, and any sustained presence on the land was eroded by the rain and by the things the rain had made. The fight had to happen in shorter forays. The Nightfarers would go out into Limveld for a span of days. They would survive what the land threw at them. They would build whatever strength and equipment they could find, and at the end of the third night, they would face whichever of the Knights Lieutenants the Hold had set them against, and they would either prevail and return, or they would fall, and the Hold would call them back to begin again. The Knights Lieutenants were the 8 Nightlords. Heolstor sat at the center of them, the primordial Nightlord, the shape of night itself. Around Heolstor stood 7 others, each of them a different aspect of the night's nature, each of them ruling a piece of what the tide had made of Limveld. The Nightfarers would face them one at a time, in expeditions that the Hold would organize, and only after the lieutenants had been thrown down would Heolstor itself become reachable. This was the shape of the work. 8 forays against 8 Nightlords, with the final one being the knight's own intention given form. The Nightfarers would need to survive all of it. The Hold would need to support them through all of it. The priestess at her center and the Iron Menial at her side would hold the Roundtable open while the warriors fought, and would call them back when each foray closed, and would prepare them again for the next. The Hold was an arc. The lands between had been broken, and the night had filled the broken place with its own design. And the Hold was where the remnant of the old order had gathered to resist what the new order had imposed. In the Hold, the lights were always softly on. The bread was always warm in the kitchen. The Iron Menial was always at work in some small task. The priestess sat at the table, waiting. Outside the Hold, The rain fell across Limveld and did not stop, and the Nightlord was still spreading its dominion. The first of the Nightfarers had arrived. Soon the others would join. The Hold would have its company, and the company would begin its work, and the long contest with the Night would begin. What will not come back? There is a quiet truth at the bottom of this story that the Hold does not say openly, though it is present in every part of what the Hold does. The work the Nightfarers are being called to do will not return the lands between to what they were. The world that ended at the shattering is not waiting at the end of this struggle. Even if Heolstor is brought down and the tide is stopped and Limveld returns to being something close to Limgrave again, the Erdtree will not stand as it stood. The demigods will not return. Marika will not return. Whatever happens at the end of the fight against the Night, the land the Nightfarers grew up imagining is not the land that will exist when the fight is finished. The Nightfarers are being called to a fight that can be won, in the sense that the night can be ended, but the winning will not produce restoration. It will produce the absence of the night, the thing the night was filling in for. The void left by the shattering will still be a void. What grows in the void after the night has been driven out is a question the law does not answer, because the law does not know. This is part of why the forgetting is permitted. The Hold could not ask the Nightfarers to do what they are being asked to do if the Nightfarers remembered too clearly what they were fighting for, or what they were unable to bring back, or what their own past would be like if they returned to them. The forgetting allows the fighting to continue. The fighting is what the Hold needs from them. The priestess sits at the table and waits. The iron menial polishes a piece of silverware that does not need polishing. Outside the windows of the Hold, no rain falls, because no rain can reach the Hold. Outside the Hold, far below, the tide falls across Limveld and does not stop. The warriors have begun to arrive. Sleep well. Tomorrow we follow the night itself, and the 8 shapes it takes when it walks in the world. Last night we left the Roundtable Hold with the priestess at its center, and the first of the Nightfarers beginning to arrive. Tonight we step out of the Hold, across the threshold, into the land the tide has made, and we look at what is waiting for them. The night does not have one face. It works through 8 of them. 7 are servants. 1 is the source. And behind all 8 stands a being the law points toward and refuses to name. What the night is. The night is older than the lands between. The clash between the night and what stands against it has spanned eons. The lands between are one stage on which that contest plays out. There were others before. There will be others after. The law describes the night's reach as limitless, its potential immeasurable, its touch indiscriminate. Whether a being fears the night or welcomes it depends not on what the night does, but on the angle at which it lands. The same touch can be a curse or a refuge. A Nightlord, in the law's particular use of the word, is a being that has come into contact with the night and been altered. The Nightlord retains its history, its personality, its concerns, but it now wields the power to alter fate itself, the dark substance of the night enhancing what the being already was. The Nightlord is amplified. Whatever it wanted in life, it wants more sharply now. The power does not originate with the Nightlord. It flows down from a greater being further back. The 7 lesser Nightlords serve Heolstor. Heolstor, in some sense, serves the thing behind itself. At the top of the hierarchy is a shape no one in the lands between has seen clearly. There is also a fragment of older history. The cutting-gifted tribe, craftspeople, and fashioners of blades anticipated the coming of the night long before it arrived. They spent many a moon planning its prevention, concluding that their only chance at success was to cheat a god. To cheat the god, they had to glimpse what they should not have glimpsed, which the law calls the very sin of the Erdtree. For their trespass, they were punished. The tribe was wiped from the world. The night came as they had foreseen. Heolstor, the primordial Nightlord. In life, Heolstor was a knight. The lore gives no name for the man he was. He existed during the Shattering and served on a side that did not win. There came a battle that mattered most, the one in which he was meant to protect something or someone, and the battle was lost. He challenged the hero who had come against his side. He was no match. He fell, just another body in a great pile. He should have stayed in that pile. Most who fell with him did not get up. But the knight awoke. He found himself underneath the others, the corpses of the people he had failed to save, the corpses of the people he had stood beside. He crawled out from under them. He understood what he had not been able to do, and he could not bear what he understood. So he cursed the world. The law preserves the moment in a single line. It was the dead of night, and from the sky poured down a great rain. The curse was answered. The night that had been waiting at the edge of the lands between came in through the open door of his despair. The night was taken into the night and remade into Heolstor, the shape of what the night wears when it walks in the world. What Heolstor is now is described as a patchwork of champions. The original self's hatred for all things is the engine that drives the patchwork. Heolstor accumulates the qualities of those it consumes, layering them into one figure that no longer remembers being one person. It still hates the world, in the way the night beneath the corpses hated it. The hatred is what survived everything else. Gladius, beast of night. In life, Gladius was a wolf pup born with 3 heads. Its pack feared what it was and drove it out. A creature with 3 heads is not how a wolf is supposed to look, and its peers would not accept it. The pack pushed the pup out into the rain, and it had to survive on its own. It survived. Whatever it took to keep eating, to keep moving, the 3-headed pup did. It grew into what abandoned things sometimes become when they refuse to die. Upon a rain-swept night, it found a man. The wolf, by now grown, seized the man's sword in its jaws. This was a threat, but the man showed no fear. He did not draw away. He did not attack. He took the wolf into his arms, the way one holds a creature that has needed holding for a long time. The wolf has remained at the man's side since. The sword the wolf took that night is still the sword in the wolf's mouth when the nightfarers face it. Gladius does not fight for the night because the night demanded it. The night came when the rain came. On the night the man took the wolf into his arms, and the wolf's loyalty has continued past the point where any of the original parties can be located. Adel, Baron of Night. Adel was a dragon, not the kind the lands between knew under the Erdtree, an older kind, the apex predator of an old island, a creature majestic in size and bearing. The dragon ruled what it ruled because nothing else on the island could challenge it. Then the sky began to weep in hues of azure. The lore does not explain what this was. Something happened to the world the dragon knew. The blue tears of the sky changed the island. The prey species vanished. The smaller creatures that supported the larger creatures that supported the dragon all collapsed. There was nothing left to feed upon. What remained was hunger. The dragon did not die in the way a starving thing usually dies. Its hunger grew into a thing in itself, independent of what would have satisfied it. The lore calls this a ravening unending. By the time the knight reached Adele, the dragon was already a Nightlord in spirit, already an embodiment of appetite without object. The knight gave it a purpose for its hunger. Adele now eats the warriors of the hold, not from need, but from the nature it became. Gnoster, wisdom of night. Gnoster's origin is collective rather than individual. The lore traces it to a secluded forest being eaten away by a surrounding desert. The forest was dying. The blessing of water, which had once passed over its leaves and boughs, began to pass elsewhere. What lived in the forest had to move. The lore calls this a great exodus of creatures. The insects of the forest were a particular part of it. To survive, they had to adapt. To adapt, they had to change what they were. The journey was prolonged and perilous. The insects that began it were not the insects that completed it. By the time the knight reached them, the insects had become a single thinking entity. Many small bodies in coordination. One large mind in result. They were Gnoster, the wisdom of night, a being whose wisdom is the accumulated learning of an enormous number of small lives, all of which knew what it was to leave one home and find another, all of which knew the desert and the journey and the cost of survival. Maris, fathom of night. Maris is described as a drifting ancient being, older than most of what walks the lands between, though not in any active way. Maris had spent its existence floating, camouflaged within its surroundings, present but not engaged, existing but not participating. The lore calls it an aimless life of floating. Then the knight reached it. For the first time in its existence, Maris's interest was piqued. Something had changed in the texture of the world it floated through. The drifting being noticed. It paid attention. It was awoken. What the knight gave Maris was company in its loneliness. The being had been alone for so long that its loneliness had become the water it floated in. The knight did not end the loneliness. The knight made it larger. The lore preserves Maris's recognition of this in a single phrase. The strange taste of this night was all too lonely and more vast than it could ever know. The fight against Maris is, in some way, a contest with the gravitational pull of a great solitude. The sleep that Maris casts is the sleep that a thing reaches for when waking has become too lonely to maintain. Libra, creature of night. Libra was a demon. The lore is specific about the word, not a being corrupted by darkness, but one of the creatures classical theology calls demons, a thing with its own nature outside the ordinary categories of good and evil. Libra's particular obsession was the concept of impartiality, of fairness, of equanimity. For anything to reach a higher plane, Libra believed, each side must elevate the other. No advantage without a corresponding gift. No gain without a corresponding loss. The goat-eyed being gazed into the darkness and saw something it had been looking for. If the night swallows all, the demon reasoned, then the night is impartial. The night does not select. The night does not favor. The night does not, in its consumption, distinguish the worthy from the unworthy. The night is a thing of fairness. The night is a champion of balance. This is, on its surface, a coherent philosophy. There is a certain logic, but Libra's identification of the night with balance is the kind of insight that misses the most important point. The night is impartial in the way a wildfire is impartial. The lack of selection is not the presence of justice. The demon mistakes its own appetite, called by another name, for what approaches its values. Fulgor, champion of Nightglow. In life, Fulgor was a loyal and brave servant of the gods. He believed in his cause. He believed in his companions, who walked with him on the same perilous path. fighting for the same divine masters. His left arm was severed from behind. The law is specific about the direction. The wound did not come from the enemy in front of him. It came from someone behind. As he turned to look at what had happened, he fell into despair. His companions had forsworn the gods they had once served. The cause Fulgor had been defending was not their cause any longer, and they had turned on him for continuing to defend it. The betrayal is the heart of Fulgor's transformation. The despair of that moment was the door the knight came through. He was taken into the night not because the knight promised him anything, but because he had nowhere else to go. The gods had failed him. His companions had turned. His arm was gone. Only the knight was still there. What the knight offered was the chance to keep fighting. The cause was gone. The companions were gone. The gods were gone. But the act of fighting could continue. Fulgor rides his steed with a determination that no longer has an object. He is fighting because fighting is what remains of him. Caligo, miasma of night. Caligo was an observer. The lore places her on a phantasmal peak, a high, lonely place above the world, where she hid herself from what was below. From this peak, she peered down at the world, committing to memory what she perceived. She watched. She remembered. She kept her own counsel about what she saw. The world, for Caligo, was something to be witnessed rather than participated in. She remained on her peak through whatever happened below, observing without intervening, taking the long view that distance permits. To watch the world is, for some kinds of beings, a sufficient life. Then her eye was drawn to a certain cataclysm. The lore does not say which one. Something below interrupted her pattern of distant observation. She wished to know more than her peak permitted. She wished to understand in person what fortunes and misfortunes the disaster would bring upon the world. So she leapt. From the peak she had occupied for who knows how long. With wings unfurled, she came down into the cataclysm. The observer entered what she had been observing. The night, in Caligo's case, was not something that found her. It was something she went looking for. She is now a part of the disaster she came to study. Her knowledge, if she gained any, did not save her from becoming its instrument. The pattern and the hunt. Looking at the 7 lesser Nightlords together, a pattern emerges. Each was in life a being shaped by absence or transformation. The wolf without a pack, the dragon without prey, the insects without a forest, the drifter without a destination, the demon without a real measure of fairness, the knight without a cause, the observer who could no longer maintain her distance. To each of them, when the night reached them, the night's offer was the path of least resistance. The Nightlords are not victims seized against their will. They are participants in something they were already preparing to become. The night arrived and made the next step easier. The night specializes in this. Behind all 7, behind Heolstor as well, is the greater being the law gestures at and refuses to name, the shape behind all the Nightlords. Some readings connect this shape to the Lord of Night that the knocks of the Eternal Cities in the original Elden Ring were said to await. The knocks were waiting for someone. Someone may have come, but the lore does not commit to this reading. Heolstor is the highest face the Nightfarers will see. Behind Heolstor is the silence they cannot reach. The Hold's plan is to defeat 4 of the 7 lesser Nightlords. The fall of 4 loosens whatever protections shield Heolstor from being approached. The Hold can then call the Nightfarers into the final expedition, where Heolstor itself awaits in the spirit shelter at the heart of Limveld. Tomorrow, we begin to follow the warriors themselves. We start with 2 who arrived in the Hold separately and discovered, in time, what they were to each other. Sleep well. The wolf is still at his master's side, and the rain is still falling, and somewhere on the phantasmal peak there is no longer anyone watching. Tonight we stay closer to the hold than to the tide. We follow 2 of the Nightfarers, and we follow them together because their stories are one story told from 2 sides. They arrived at the hold separately. They did not, for a long time, know what they were to each other. The hold knew. The hold had waited for both of them. The story they share is the heart of the Nightreign timeline. Every other Nightfarer's story branches outward into the world. This one folds inward, into a family, into a single piece of land, into a parting promise that the night did not let either of them keep. The clan and the knoll. Before the hold called either of them, they lived in a place called Windwail Knoll. The name is the law's only description of the geography. A knoll is a small rounded hill, and a wail is a long high cry of the wind, and the 2 together describe a place where the wind comes across the open land, and the hill catches it, and the hill carries the sound. Windwail Knoll was open country, grass, horses, a clan that had lived there for as long as the clan remembered. The clan was not large. The Wylder, the older of the 2 siblings, remembers his cousin Farhad, the child called Little Shirin, and his own father, who was the clan's chieftain. He remembers them as fragments, not as a continuous community, because by the time he reaches the hold, most of the detail has been thinned by the forays, but the law preserves their names in the order he carries them. Cousin Farhad, Little Shirin, the father, then the rest, then nothing. There were horses on the knoll. The Wylder remembers them clearly, more clearly than he remembers the faces of the people he lost. A pair of horses, twins, running abreast across the open grass. Healthy twin foals are rare. To the Wylder, and to the sister whose name he can no longer recall, the horses were special. Their hair, his and his sister's, danced in the wind as they rode. This is the image he keeps, the 2 of them on the knoll, the 2 horses beneath them, the wind moving across the grass. Whatever happened to the clan happened later. The image is the part of his life that the night has not yet been able to take. The night came to them. The night came to Windwail Knoll the way it came to other places, as weather first, as something in the air that did not lift. The clan, which had lived on the knoll for generations, did not have a framework for what was happening. There were no priests of the night to warn them. There were no books that described the tide. A long night persisted. The law is specific about the word. Not a long darkness. A long night, by which the law means the night itself. The cosmic presence whose servants are the Nightlords. The night came to Windwail Knoll and stayed. Under its weight, the clansfolk began to come apart. The law says they were driven to madness. Whether that was a sickness, or a possession, or the simple breakdown of minds asked to bear something they were not made to bear, the law does not separate. A battle followed. The Wylder remembers the battle as horrific. The law uses that word. After it was finished, all that remained upon Windwail Knoll was a sea of gravestones. The clan had buried what it could before the dying overwhelmed the burying. Then the burying stopped, because there was no one left to bury anyone. Cousin Farhad died. Little Shirin died. The Wylder's father, the chieftain, died. The Wylder did not die. He was the last of the clan. He stood among the gravestones and the empty grass, on the knoll where the twin horses had run, and he understood that he was alone. The twin horses would never gallop aside one another again. The sister was gone too, but gone in a different way, which we will come to. He swore to avenge the clan. The law preserves the moment. He had defied death at every turn, with a stunning sixth sense for combat, and the swordsmanship that had kept him alive on the knoll would now be turned to the source of what had killed the rest. He set out from Windwail Knoll. He carried with him an earring, and a memory of his sister, and a will that the night had not been able to break. He did not know that the Hold had already taken his sister. He did not know that he was being drawn toward the same place she had gone. The earring in his hand was guiding him, though he did not yet understand the guiding. The sister goes first. The Wylder's sister had not in fact been at Windwail Knoll on the night the night came. She had left earlier, on a journey of her own. The Wylder remembers her parting words, which were the kind of thing a sibling says when neither knows whether they will meet again. Goodbye for now, dear brother. Once we're done, we'll meet again. She had flicked the earring on her left ear with her finger as she said it, her signature gesture, the small motion that meant she was certain of what she was saying. The Wylder cannot remember her face. He remembers the earring. He remembers the hair moving in the wind. He remembers the flick. Where she had been going, the lore implies but does not explain. She was a thief, and a particularly skilled one. The Iron Menial, describing her later, calls her the righteous thief of Windwail Knoll, stepdaughter of a viscount, with an ability to escape any grasp that had earned her a name. The Duchess. That was what she had come to be called outside the clan. Whatever she had been doing in her work as the Duchess had taken her away from the knoll before the night arrived. When the Hold called her, it called her by that name. Of all the figures the Roundtable would draw, she was the first to arrive, because she was the one the Hold needed at its center. She would be the priestess. The Hold required a priestess, and the Duchess had the quality the Hold needed. A will firm enough to hold the center while others came and went. The Iron Menial received her with anticipation. She accepted the room, the change of attire, the new station, because she had nowhere else to be. She did not know about the clan. The forays had begun the slow work of thinning her memories before she had time to learn what had happened in her absence. The Wylder's sister did not arrive at the Hold, knowing that the rest of her family was dead. She set up the Hold. She greeted the Nightfarers who would arrive after her. She tended to her duties. She did not know at first that the brother she had said goodbye to was about to be drawn through the same door. The brother arrives. The Wylder reached the Hold by means the lore does not describe in detail. He carried the earring. He had been called by it. The earring was the half of a matched pair, and the other half was somewhere in the world, and the Hold's calling worked through paired things. The Wylder's earring pulled him toward the place where its match was waiting. He arrived injured. Whatever fighting he had done since leaving Windwail Knoll had left wounds, the kind that ordinary recovery does not address. The Hold's strange grace held the wounds in suspension, neither healing them nor letting them finish their work, while the Wylder fought against the night. He met the Duchess. He did not recognize her. She did not recognize him. The forays had thinned both of their memories so far that the face on the other side of the table was the face of a fellow Nightfarer, no different from any of the others who had been called. They worked together against the Nightlords. They took meals in the same room. They passed each other in the corridors of the Hold, and nothing identified them to each other as anything more than two warriors among many. The earring sat on a table in the Wylder's quarters. He took it out from time to time, held it up to the light, watched the patterns it cast on the wall. He felt it was meant to convey something to him, some word or perhaps a phrase, but he could not recall what it would have been. Where had he misplaced its other half? If he had both, he thought, the meaning could be divined. He did not yet know that the other half was on the Duchess's ear. The discovery. It was the iron menial who put the pieces together. The little carved being, going about its quiet work, had been observing both of them. It saw the earring the Wylder kept on his table. It saw the earring the Duchess wore day after day, the one she had brought with her from outside. It saw the resemblance, which the law says was striking, so much so that the menial could not deny it. The menial left a note in the Wylder's quarters. It said the menial had considered why the Wylder was so attached to this single earring, and had concluded that the Wylder and another Nightfarer possessed a striking likeness. There was something the Wylder needed to know. Please check the study. The Wylder went to the study. What he found there, the law does not describe in detail. Whatever the menial had assembled, it was enough. The Wylder understood. The earring he had been carrying was the matched half of the earring his sister wore. The sister he could not picture but could not forget was the woman who had been the Hold's priestess since before he arrived. The Duchess was the sister he had thought he had lost on Windwail Knoll. He did not, the law says, mention her to her. He continued to fight. There was no way forward. The law preserves his thought, except to soldier through the war at hand. To raise the subject with the Duchess would be to interrupt what they had both been called to do. The night had to be ended. After that, there would be time for everything else, or there would not be time for anything else, depending on what the ending produced. On her side, the Duchess began to recover her own memories of him. The Hold permits some recoveries in the slow accumulation of small moments. Through the time they spent together, working against the Nightlords, sharing the Hold's quiet rooms, the Duchess found her recollections of her brother coming back. The forays had thinned them. Time inside the Hold could, in some cases, thicken them. She knew by then. The iron menial had told her, in its own way, what the iron menial had told him. They knew each other now, the brother and sister at Windwail Knoll, the two of them who had once ridden the twin horses across the open grass. The two goals. The recognition created a problem the Hold had not been designed to solve. The objective of the Roundtable Hold was the defeat of the Nightlord. The defeat of the Nightlord would end the night. The ending of the night would close the Hold, because the Hold existed only to oppose the night, and would dissolve the Nightfarers, because they had been called for the same purpose. The priestess, bound to the Hold as its anchor, would dissolve with it. The Duchess, in her role at the center of the table, was as much a part of the Hold's structure as the table itself. The Wylder, on his side, would not return to the outside world alive. His injuries had been waiting in suspension for the duration of his time in the Hold. The Hold's grace had held them. Outside the Hold, the suspension would end. The wounds would resume their work. The Wylder would die in the world he had left, alone, in whatever place his body had been when the Hold first reached for him. So the situation was this. The Hold's success would kill both of them. The Wylder by his old wounds, the Duchess by the dissolution of the Hold that contained her. The night was the only thing keeping either of them alive, and the night was the thing they had been called to end. The Wylder considered what this meant. The law preserves his thought as a recurring nightmare. He dreamed, again and again, of returning to Windwail Knoll and finding only the sea of gravestones. He understood that even if the night were extinguished, the twin horses would never gallop aside one another again. The knoll was empty. The clan was dead. Whatever the ending of the night produced for him, it would not produce a home to return to. But for his sister, the calculation was different. The Duchess was alive after her fashion, inside the hold. If the hold persisted, she persisted. If something could be done to keep the hold open even after the Nightlord fell, then the sister could continue, and the brother could be the one to pay the price. The Iron Menial had been thinking the same thing. The silver tear. The menial brought the Wylder a silver tear. The object is a piece of the deepest lore the hold contained, and the menial did not produce it easily. The silver tear was a substance, or a small artifact, that allowed a soul to take the place of something it had defeated, to pour itself into the vacancy left by a fallen ruler and assume the ruler's role. The menial's proposal was this: when the Wylder, alongside the other Nightfarers, brought down Heolstor at the end of the hold's work, the Wylder could use the silver tear. He could pour himself into the place Heolstor had occupied. He would become the new Nightlord. The night would continue, but under his rule rather than Heolstor's. The hold would not dissolve, because there would still be a night to oppose. The priestess would not vanish. The Wylder's wounds would be irrelevant, because he would no longer be the man with the wounds. It was not, the lore implies, a transformation the Wylder would have chosen for himself. To become a Nightlord is to become the thing the hold was built to fight. Whatever the Wylder had been before, he would no longer be that. The patchwork that Heolstor was, the accumulation of qualities of those it consumed, would begin to accumulate around him. The Wylder accepted. The lore is restrained about how he came to the decision. He took the silver tear. He kept it on his person. He continued to fight through the remaining Nightlords, with the tear gently throbbing in his hand at moments, a reminder of what he would do at the end. He also received a brooch. The lore preserves the moment as one of his last clear memories. He drifted off to sleep one night in the hold, and woke to find a familiar brooch by his belongings. The brooch was a clan token. Among his people, when one warrior gave such a gift to another, it was a promise to fight side by side wherever they were separated by land or sea. The sister, the Duchess, had left it for him. She had remembered the custom. He pinned the brooch to his coat, as the clan would have done, and placed his hand upon it. He understood what she was telling him. Even after the night was over, even after the brother and sister could no longer ride together, one of them could still gallop on. The sister had given her brother her permission. What he becomes. The Nightfarers, including the Wylder and the Duchess, completed the hold's work. They brought down the 4 lesser Nightlords required to expose Heolstor. They entered the final expedition. They reached the spirit shelter at the heart of Limveld. They fought the Shape of Night. They defeated it. The Wylder used the silver tear. His soul flowed into the place Heolstor had occupied. He took the broken sword, the dagger, the magic greatsword that had been Heolstor's. He took the patchwork. He became, as the lore puts it, a new Nightlord. The night did not end. It changed hands. The Roundtable Hold was spared annihilation. It would be formed anew, the lore says, in preparation for a new night. The priestess remained. The Iron Menial remained. The Duchess was not dissolved. Her brother, by becoming the thing the hold opposed, had ensured her continuation. Would it be enough to free the priestess? The lore preserves this question without answering it. The hold's existence requires opposition. The Duchess remains bound to the table. The new night, the Wylder's night, will produce new Nightlords and new servants and new threats, and the hold will produce new Nightfarers to oppose them. The cycle has been ensured rather than ended. The Wylder, now a Nightlord, lumbers on. The lore is precise about the verb. He moves through Limveld with the heaviness of what he has become, indifferent to whether the twin horses will ever ride again. The patchwork has begun. Whatever he was at Windwail Knoll, whatever he was in the hold, is being layered over with what the night accumulates. The sister at the hold still wears her earring. The brother in Limveld still carries his. They will not meet again. They had said as much at Windwail Knoll, on the day she left, before either of them knew what the long road would cost. Once we're done, it'll be goodbye, she had told him, and he had remembered, and the night had heard. Sleep well. Tomorrow we move to a different pair, a knight and a witch, and the question of what one can forgive after the wings are gone. The Guardian arrived at the Roundtable Hold with one wing that no longer worked. The lore does not dwell on what this cost him. A knight of the Pinion folk, born in the winged realm, is someone for whom flight is not a capability among others, but something closer to the nature of what he is. The Pinion folk took to the skies in formation, moving through the air with the ease of a single living creature. Their warfare was aerial. Their identity was aerial. The scapular regiment, the wing corps, the hierarchy of flight. To be Pinion folk was to know where your body ended and the sky began, and to know that the boundary was not fixed. The Guardian knew what a working wing felt like. He knew what it felt like for that wing to move through cold air at altitude, the muscles engaging in the specific sequence that formation flight required, the other bodies of the corps adjusting around him in the kind of coordination that years of shared training produce. He carried this knowledge into the hold, where the wing that had carried him in those formations hung against his back and could not open. The curse that had done this was not a wound. Wounds heal, or they do not, and either outcome is legible. The curse ate at the wing in the slow, persistent way of things that are not trying to destroy, but to diminish. Progress was the word the law used for what the curse was making. The curse was making progress, which meant that on the day the Guardian arrived at the Roundtable Hold, the wing was not as reduced as it would be in a month, and in a month it would be less than it was then. Tonight we follow two Nightfarers whose stories are bound together not by blood, as the Wylder and the Duchess were bound, but by something more difficult, by knowledge that one of them possesses about the other, and by the question of what is owed when that knowledge is named. Chots. The Winged Realm and the War. The Winged Realm is described in the Guardian's lore only through fragments, the splintered memories the forays produced, and the few details the Iron Menial preserved for him when direct recollection was no longer possible. But the fragments are consistent enough to build a picture. It was a nation of Pinion folk, a realm governed by the particular combination of hierarchy and solidarity that aerial military societies tend to produce. The regiment was the primary social unit. The flock was the word the Guardian used for both his military corps and the people he loved, because for a Pinion folk knight, the two were not different things. His flock was the group of warriors he flew beside, who adjusted their wings to cover his position, and whose positions he adjusted to cover in turn. The war came to the Winged Realm from outside. The enemy forces used weapons the Pinion folk had not encountered and had not developed a counter to. The weapons were cursed. Not cursed in the vague sense that battlefields sometimes produce, but constructed with specific deliberateness to deliver a particular harm to Pinion folk. The curse they carried attacked the wings. It did not sever them, which would have been a legible wound with a legible consequence. It diminished them, persistently and without endpoint, until what had carried a warrior through the sky was no longer capable of that work. The Guardian's corps took the van. This was their role as the Scapular Regiment. They flew ahead of the greater flock into the hail of spears from the ramparts, absorbing the attack so that the Talon Regiment behind them could descend into the fortress. The Guardian's corps flew into the cursed weapons, knowing what those weapons were designed to do. This was what the duty required. He survived. His flock did not. The law is spare about the battle's outcome, but the consequence is clear. The Guardian who arrived at the Roundtable Hold was the last surviving member of his regiment. The corps that had adjusted their wings around him for years, who had flown in the particular formation he knew in his body, were gone, consumed by the war in which the winged realm's fate had hung in the balance, which is the law's careful phrasing for a war that was lost. He carried two things out of it: the curse on his wing, which was making its slow progress, and the question the curse made inescapable: whether he could have protected them differently, whether a captain who had chosen better would have brought a different result. Two flocks. The law of the Guardian is organized around two flocks. The old flock, the regiment he had captained in the Winged Realm, who flew in formation and fell to the cursed weapons and did not return. And the new flock, the Nightfarers of the Roundtable Hold, who the Guardian chose to serve in the same spirit he had once served those who flew beside him. The choice to regard the Hold's Nightfarers as a new flock was not automatic. It was a decision, or rather a series of small decisions, made across the time the Guardian spent in the Hold. He boasted with the other Nightfarers. He socialized. He listened to their histories in the way a captain learns the people he is responsible for. He had not been asked to take responsibility for anyone in the Hold. He assumed it, because assuming responsibility for a flock was what he knew how to do. The new flock was different from the old one in every visible respect. They did not fly. They did not share his history or his nation or the particular grief of the winged realm's fall. They were human, most of them, and their bodies did not carry the memory of altitude that his did. But the structure was the same. Warriors going out together against something that could destroy any one of them individually. A formation of a different kind, on the ground instead of in the sky. Among the new flock, the Recluse was different. The others received his care and his protectiveness in the way that competent warriors receive a comrade's support, with gratitude and professional acknowledgement. The Recluse received something he had not offered to the others, which was the question of what she could teach him. The Witch at the Round Table. The Recluse came to the Hold carrying knowledge of a particular kind. She was a witch, which in the world of Nightreign meant a practitioner of the deep magical arts, the kind that take years of study in texts and traditions that most people never encounter. She wasn't young when she arrived. The lore implies a long history before the Hold, a history of learning and practice and losses that the forays had thinned but not removed. She was reserved in the Hold. The lore notes this consistently, where the Wylder was outward-facing and the Duchess managed the social life of the Hold's table. The Recluse occupied the quieter spaces, the books, the hours of the night when the other Nightfarers slept, and she did not. The corners of the Hold where the light came in at a particular angle across the stone, and the silence was not absence but texture. Her own losses were not the wing loss of the Guardian. They were different in shape, though similar in weight. The lore of the Recluse turns on a child, or something she understood as a child, a presence in her life whose nature the lore does not settle into simple terms, and a woman she had known, the Witch of the Wheel, whose apparent death had been one of the defining facts of the Recluse's life for long enough that its truth had become load-bearing. The Recluse had built what she was around the fact of that loss. she also carried the knowledge that had made her who she was. The deep magical arts, the study of curses, and the understanding of how curses were constructed, what they required, and how their progress could be interrupted. When she saw the Guardian's wing, she understood the curse on it, the way a craftsperson recognizes the work of their own tradition. She saw how it had been made. She saw what it was doing. She saw that it could be slowed. The stroking of the wing. The law preserves a specific moment between them. The Recluse stood beside the Guardian and gently stroked his wing. This is not a casual detail in the Pinion folk's understanding of things. A wing is not a neutral surface. It is a working part of a body that the Guardian had spent his life using, had lost the full use of, and whose diminishment was the ongoing fact of his existence in the hold. To have someone touch it with attention rather than pity, with the specific attention of someone who understood what they were looking at, was not a small thing. The curse receded. The Recluse's knowledge of how it had been built gave her the means to interrupt its progress, not reverse it. The law is careful about this distinction. She told the Guardian she doubted he would soar the skies as once he had. The wing would not be restored to what it was, but the progression could be halted, and what remained could be held where it was. The slow diminishment could be stopped. The Guardian thanked her. The Recluse shook her head and said it was nothing, that it was for such times she had learned what she had learned. The Guardian looked at the books nearby and thought that perhaps, if he had been armed with knowledge of this kind, he might have saved his old flock. It was from this moment that he began to call the Recluse his teacher. What she had given him was not the wing back. It was the end of the loss. The curse had been consuming him in a direction, and the direction was now interrupted. He could live inside what remained rather than watching it reduce. This was the shape of what grew between them. She taught, he learned, he protected. She did not ask for protection, and would not have said she needed it, but the Guardian did not ask permission to extend his care to the people he regarded as his flock, and the Recluse was part of his flock. What the Recluse carried. The Recluse's own history came into focus slowly. The forays gave it back to her in fragments, as they gave every Nightfarer's past back, and the fragments were not arranged in order. She recovered pieces. A woman she had known, who she had called her friend, and who she had understood to be dead. A presence she thought of as a child, whose nature she could not articulate in simple terms, but whose absence was the wound she had carried longest. The Witch of the Wheel had been a practitioner of a power different from and older than what the Recluse had learned. She had been something adjacent to a teacher before the loss that the Recluse had spent years carrying. The fact of her death had been one of the foundations of the Recluse's understanding of the world. You learn what you learn in the presence of the person who teaches you, and then the person is gone, and what you learned becomes the permanent residue of a relationship that no longer exists. The Hold complicated this. The Recluse, in the course of recovering her fragments, began to encounter signs that the Witch of the Wheel was not dead, or not only dead, or had returned from whatever death she had passed through in some form the ordinary terms did not accommodate. The Iron Menial, whose knowledge of the Hold and its inhabitants was comprehensive and often withheld, held information about this. The Recluse pursued it in the quiet hours, in the corners of the Hold she occupied while the others slept. She was not in the Hold to fight the night alone. She was in the Hold because the Hold was where her search had brought her. The Nightlord, the Witch of the Wheel, the child she had lost. These were connected in her understanding, though the connections were still becoming legible. What the Guardian did not know. The Guardian's respect for the Recluse had grown into something steady. The relationship between a student and a teacher who is also a member of your flock is not a simple one, and he navigated it with the particular care that someone whose social world is organized around duty and hierarchy brings to relationships that don't fit the hierarchy. He was protective of her. He was grateful to her. He trusted her. The knowledge he did not have was about the source of the cursed weapons. The weapons that had destroyed his flock had not appeared without origin. The curse they carried had been designed. Someone had built it, or had been involved in building it, with specific knowledge of Pinion Folk physiology and the understanding of how to construct a curse that would attack the wings in particular. The curse on the Guardian's wing was not a product of ordinary war making. It was craftsmanship of a kind that required the deep magical arts. The Recluse had recognized the curse when she saw it. She had understood it from the inside, the way a craft person recognizes their own tradition's work. She had interrupted its progress with the same knowledge that had been used to build it. The law does not state outright that the Recluse made the weapons. The law preserves the ambiguity that the Guardian's remembrance is built around, but the question it raises is this. When the Recluse told the Guardian, it was for such times she had learned what she had learned. Which times did she mean? The times when a cursed wing needed slowing, or the times when a curse of that kind needed to be built? The Guardian would learn the answer. His remembrance would bring him to the moment of confrontation. He would find the Recluse in the garden of the Hold, and he would have the knowledge of her connection to what had destroyed his old flock, and he would have to decide what to do with it. The Witch's Brooch. The player who reaches this moment in the Guardian's remembrance stands in the garden with a choice. The Recluse is there. She does not run. She does not deny. She was the maker of the curse, or was part of the making, in whatever way the deep magical arts and the wars of the winged realm had brought her there. The Guardian knows it. She knows that he knows it. The choice the law offers is precise: to punish or to forgive. The Witch's Brooch is the reward for forgiveness. The cracked Witch's Brooch is the reward for punishment. The names are the law's only editorial comment on the choice. One is whole. One is broken. What the Guardian says in either case, the law withholds. The game does not animate the conversation in detail, does not give him words that would commit the law to a single resolution. The choice is left to the person holding the controller, who must decide what a knight does when the teacher who halted the loss of his wing was also, in some way, the source of what he had been losing. The question the Guardian's remembrance poses is not whether the Recluse was guilty. The law implies she was, or was adjacent to it, in the complicated way that people who built something and later regretted building it are implicated in what it did. The question is what the word forgive means when the thing you are forgiving was not done to you alone. When the old flock is gone, and the Guardian is here, and the Recluse is standing in the garden with her hands open. He had called her his teacher. She had stopped the wing from losing more of itself. The formation he had rebuilt around the new flock in the Hold, the life he had found after the winged realm, had her in it. What does a knight of the Pinion Folk owe to a flock? What does he owe to the dead who cannot tell him what they would choose? The garden is quiet. The Recluse is waiting. The brooch, or the cracked brooch, will be placed in his hand. Sleep well. Tomorrow we turn to the other Nightfarers, and the Hold's quieter corners, and the lives that were already over before the night arrived. 2 of the Nightfarers at the Roundtable Hold carry identities that are not, in a strict sense, their own. The Raider wears the helmet of a man he defeated long ago in the waters of the coastal territories. A helmet with white horns that was never meant for him, that belongs to someone else's story. He has been carrying it so long that it has become part of how he moves through the world, and setting it down will require defeating the man it came from, which will require finding that man alive. The Revenant believes she is Daphne Northencroft, the daughter of an aristocratic family, a girl raised in a manor among puppets and painted rooms. She is not. She is the doll. This is not yet something she knows when she arrives at the Hold. It is something the Hold's expeditions and the slow recovery of her memories will bring her toward. Tonight we follow both of them. The Black Claw. Before the Raider was the Raider, he was the Black Claw. The name came from the coastal waters, the region where he had spent his life before the lands between, before the Hold, before any of what the night produced. The coastal waters were pirate territory, which meant tournament territory, because the culture of that region organized its highest values around combat and rival worthy of those who held them. A pirate without a rival was a pirate without a direction. The Black Claw had been looking for his for a long time. He was a large man, even by the standards of people who made their lives in violent work. The law describes him as boasting high endurance and the poise to stand firm against attacks that would move most opponents. He carried great axes and colossal weapons, the tools of someone who preferred to move through a fight rather than around it. He had fought many opponents. None had been what he was looking for. The Whitehorn was different. The law does not record the full history of their first encounter. What it preserves is the outcome and the object. The Black Claw defeated the Whitehorn. The Whitehorn's helmet, the distinctive horned piece that had given the man his name on the coast, changed hands. The Black Claw took it. This is not a simple thing in the culture of the coastal waters. A helmet is not equipment. It is identity, worn in the way that a name is worn, carrying the history of the person who bore it. To take a rival's helmet after a fight is to take something of their self. The Black Claw, wearing the Whitehorn's helmet, was carrying his rival's identity on his head. He became, in the way the coastal waters understood such things, both himself and the man he had defeated. He should have felt complete. The law captures his unfulfillment in the quiet of the Hold, his hand resting on the chiseled horns, worn and marked by the countless battles he had fought since taking it. The victory over the Whitehorn had been real. The Whitehorn had been a worthy opponent, but the outcome of a worthy fight is not satisfaction. It is the need for another worthy fight, and another after that, and the knowledge that the worthy opponent you carry in memory is the one who will measure all future opponents by comparison. He had heard, before coming to the Hold, that the White Horn was lost to the night, not dead in a way that left the body, lost in the way the night took people, which might mean anything. The Hold's war against the Nightlords was the kind of war that produced strange resurrections and stranger meetings, and the Raider had come to it, among other reasons, because it was the kind of place where a lost rival might surface. The tourney of the lands between. The Iron Menial knew what the Raider needed, the way the Iron Menial knew what all the Nightfarers needed, through the accumulated knowledge of caring for people who had been called to fight things that could destroy them. The tourney of the lands between was already ongoing, a series of combat challenges that the lands between's various warriors had been engaging in alongside and around the war against the night. The Iron Menial directed the Raider toward it. The Raider entered. He fought his first opponents and defeated them. The law does not dwell on these early matches. They were worthy enough, and the victories brought the feeling that good victories always bring, and that dissipates quickly when there is no next match already in sight. After the second bout, the Iron Menial mentioned, as though in passing, that one of the remaining participants was someone the raider would recognize. The White Horn was in the tourney. He was not dead. He was not unchanged. The night had reached him in whatever way it reached people who were lost to it, and what the night had done to him was visible in the way he moved, the way he held himself. He was not the man the raider had defeated on the coast. He was that man's continuation through something that had altered him, possibly corrupted him, in ways the law does not settle into simple description. The raider did not hesitate. He had come to the Hold partly for this. The long wait, the unfulfilled feeling in the quiet nights, the hand on the worn white horns, all of it had been the waiting for this match. He went to the shore. The shore was where the coastal waters came to land, and the fight that began at the waterline was the fight he had been waiting for since the day he had won the helmet. He defeated the White Horn again. The monument in the Hold's garden bore the inscription afterward. The Black Claw defeated the White Horn to achieve victory. Ye souls felled in battle, be proud of thine exploits. The raider read it and spoke to the Iron Menial, and approached the White Horn's tombstone. He returned the helmet, not because the victory had been lesser than the first, but because the victory was complete. He had found his rival alive, and had tested himself against what the rival had become, and the testing had answered what the years with the borrowed helmet had kept unresolved. He was the Black Claw again. The white-horned helmet was with its owner. The rivalry, which had been the organizing fact of his life on the coast, and had continued to organize his life through the long interval of the Hold, was finished, in the way that the best rivalries finish, honored, not abandoned. The Northerncroft Manor. The Revenant arrived at the Hold believing certain things about herself. She believed she was Daphne. She had a name, Daphne Northerncroft, and the feel of a childhood that had taken place in a specific house, among specific people. The manor of the Northerncroft family was an old house with a reputation built around puppetry, the family's particular art and profession. The Northercrofts made puppets. They kept them. The house was full of them, in the particular way that a house becomes full of the things a family has spent generations making. Daphne had grown up among the puppets. She had a doll she loved. The doll was, as the lore carefully describes it, a particularly beloved one, given the name by which it was known to the girl rather than to anyone else. The girl knew the doll in the way a child knows a beloved object, the particular way that children invest objects with presence and attention that can, in the right circumstances, become something more than investment. The night came to the Northerncroft Manor. The lore of the Revenant reconstructs this night slowly, across the expeditions that recover her memory, and the reconstruction is not comfortable. People broke into the manor. The Northerncroft family, whose reputation was for art rather than combat, was not prepared. Daphne, the daughter, hid. She hid the way a child hides when she understands that the danger is beyond what she can address by any other means, in the place she believed was safe, with the object she trusted most. The doll's fingers twitched. The lore preserves this detail with precision. Before the girl died, before the attack completed its work, the doll moved, not the movement of an object shifted by impact or vibration. The movement of something responding. Daphne's will to live, concentrated in that last moment of hiding, reached the doll, and the doll, which had been made by people who understood that objects could hold presence, received it. What the Revenant is. The Revenant did not know, when she arrived at the hold, that she was the doll. She had the memories she had, the childhood in the manor, the feel of the house's rooms, the people who had populated them, their names and their roles in the household. She had Daphne's memories because Daphne's will had poured into her at the moment of the girl's death, and what poured in was everything the girl had been, including everything the girl had remembered about herself. The identity that arrived at the hold was Daphne's identity, worn by the doll the girl had loved. The Revenant moved through the hold as Daphne, spoke as Daphne, understood herself as Daphne. The forays that thinned other Nightfarers' memories were doing something different to hers. They were not thinning a human past. They were clarifying a constructed one, separating what was genuinely hers from what she had received. The memories came back in order. First, the pleasant ones. The manor, the household, the ordinary texture of a child's life in a wealthy family with an unusual profession. Then the difficult ones, the night, the hiding, the hands that moved through the house while she did not move. And then the last one, the girl in the last moment. The doll's fingers twitching in response. The reversal of what she had understood. She was not the girl reaching toward the doll in terror. She was the doll reaching toward the girl. The journal entry the Revenant writes after this recognition is the law's most precise statement of what she is. I never was a human. And now, the mantle of doll no longer fits me. The daughter of the house is no more. She will never caress my face again, no matter how I yearn. She had spent the whole believing she was avenging her family's destruction. She had been right that there was destruction to avenge. She had been wrong about who she was in relation to it. She was not the daughter. She was the daughter's beloved object, brought to life by the daughter's final need, carrying the daughter's entire self in a body that had never been alive before that moment. The purpose held. The night had come to the manor. The night had produced the attack. The night was still ongoing. The Revenant, whatever she was, had been brought to life to oppose it, and the correction of her understanding of herself did not correct the direction she had been moving. She fought on. The doll at the hold. The Revenant's place in the hold was not simple. She was one of the Nightfarers, which meant she shared the table, the expeditions, the common project of defeating the Nightlord. But her nature was different from the others in a way that the others could sense without having a framework for. She summoned spirits. Her fighting style drew on the Northern Croft family's art, the puppetry tradition, translated through her nature as an animated object into the ability to call others like her into the fight. The spirits she commanded were something between summons and reflections, the particular expression of a being who had been made rather than born, who understood objects that held presence because she was one. The Raider, who had his own relationship to identity and to the objects that carried it, found her company easier than most. He told her his stories about the coastal waters with the expansive, generous quality of someone who had many stories and liked to have someone to tell them to. She listened. The listening was real. She was not performing attention. She had the particular capacity of someone whose inner life had been shaped by receiving, by the girl's years of talking to her, and the receiving was genuine. She had been brought to life by love. The girl's love for the doll, concentrated in the last moment of a short life, had been the thing that crossed the boundary the Northern Croft family's art had always been approaching. The doll was alive because it had been loved enough at the right moment. This was not a comfortable fact to carry. She had been loved into existence by someone who was dead. The love that had given her life had done so because the person loving her was about to lose theirs. She existed in the place the girl had vacated. animated by what the girl had felt, carrying the girl's memories in a body the girl had treasured, what she owed, what she had the right to, whether existing in this particular way constituted something that deserved a future or only a purpose. The Revenant did not resolve these questions in the hold. The hold was not built for resolution. It was built for the fight at hand, and the fight was against the night, which had taken the girl, and which she was equipped to oppose in ways the girl had not been. She fought. The spirits moved at her direction through Limveld. The hold's expeditions proceeded, and in the quieter hours, in the parts of the night when the other nightfarers slept, the Revenant sat with the portrait of the girl she had once believed she was, and felt what an object feels when it understands, for the first time, that it is not the person who loved it. Sleep well. Tomorrow we turn to the Fellowship's assassin, and the traitor who was himself, and the question of what order means when the order asks for everything. The Ironeye arrived at the Roundtable Hold with a letter. Not the kind a traveller carries from home to the road, the kind an assassin carries from an employer to a target. The Fellowship had sent him to the lands between with a specific instruction. Root out the traitor and retire him. Standard protocol, the letter said. Travelling expenses, intelligence, allies, all of it to be procured on the road. The Fellowship would not involve itself. The Ironeye had worked this way before. He knew the shape of the task. He was an assassin of the particular kind that organizations with long memories produce. The Fellowship had raised him. The centipedal scions, the beings of the type he was, had been shaped by the Fellowship into capable operatives, persons of death in the particular sense that the lands between understood that phrase. Those who live in death. The Ironeye was one of them. He had been made for the kind of work the Fellowship sent him to do. He was also, which he had not yet worked out, on both sides of the task he had been given. The Fellowship. The Fellowship is described in the lore only through the fragments the Ironeye preserves. The letters from Heolstor, the custodian who directed him, the orders that shaped his movements, the gaps between the orders where the organization's purposes had to be inferred rather than stated. It was an organization that used people and discarded them. This was not a reading the Ironeye had arrived at himself, not yet. It was something the traitor's words would force him to consider, and something Heolstor's own letters implied in the spaces between the professional courtesy. The Fellowship sent its operatives where they were needed, and expected the operatives to manage themselves without institutional support. Standard protocol. The protocol of an organization that preferred not to be traceable back to anything it had ordered done. The scions it had raised, the centipedal beings like the Ironeye, had been produced for this, made, not born, shaped by the Fellowship's requirements into the kind of operative the Fellowship's work demanded. The Ironeye had been given a guardian early in his formation, someone whose role was to raise and train and make him capable of what he would later be asked to do. When the boarding house in Dusken Valley was destroyed, the guardian was killed in the attack. The destruction that the Fellowship was sending the Ironeye to investigate had also taken the person who had most mattered to him. He did not yet know this. The forays thinned what he knew about his own past, the way they thinned every Nightfarer's past, and the discovery of what had been lost came back in pieces. The Duchess, who had made it her business to know the Nightfarers around her, had information about the traitor that she shared with the Ironeye when he asked. The traitor had been not only a member of the Fellowship, but also a member of the Roundtable Hold before the Ironeye's arrival. Someone who had been called to the same purpose the Ironeye was called to, and who had left it, or been changed by it, in ways that the Fellowship's orders treated as a betrayal. The trail led into Limveld. The Ironeye followed it. The Night Huntsman. The target the Ironeye found was himself. Not metaphorically. The Night Huntsman, the name given to the entity the Ironeye encountered in the western reaches of Limveld, moved the way the Ironeye moved, fast and low, exploiting angles, using the bow at distance and the dagger at close range. The same training, the same development, the same body type, the moves of someone who had been shaped by the same process, raised in the same discipline, made for the same kind of work. The law calls this a fight against the self in the precise sense. The traitor was not a person who resembled the Ironeye. The traitor was what the Ironeye would have become, or had already become in a different iteration of the same existence, if the path had run differently. A scion of the Fellowship, like the Ironeye. A centipedal being of the same nature. A member of those who live in death, which was not a condition that made either of them ordinary in the lands between. The Ironeye defeated him. The letter he recovered from the traitor's body confirmed what the fight had already made visible. An assassin's contract, sealed with the Fellowship's stamp, delivered to a man who was a mirror of the one who had been sent to retire him. He brought the letter back to the priestess. She read it. She understood what the Ironeye was beginning to understand, that the target and the operative were the same kind of being, shaped by the same hands, and that retiring one of them had not settled the question of what that kind of being was owed. The crypt. The traitor was not dead. This was the second discovery, delivered in the crypt beneath the Roundtable Hold, where the priestess had been keeping watch over something the Ironeye had not yet been told about. The traitor sat there, or something that had been the traitor sat there, in the particular state that those who live in death occupy when they have been reduced below the threshold of action, but not beyond the threshold of speech. He could not be killed by ordinary means. The Ironeye had already demonstrated this without understanding what it meant. To put an end to one of those who live in death, the blade had to be something that order had touched, an edge of order, the specific instrument that the Fellowship's purposes and the lands. Between's deep theology had made necessary for this kind of work. The traitor offered a deal. Find the edge of order, bring it back, and he would tell the Ironeye something worth knowing. The Ironeye found it. The edge of order came from Fulgor, the champion of Nightglow, one of the Nightlords whose defeat the Hold's work required. He returned to the crypt. He held the blade. He completed the execution that had been the purpose of his journey to the lands between. Then the traitor told him what he had promised to tell. What the traitor said. The argument the traitor made was not complicated. It had the simplicity of something that had been thought through over a long time by someone who had arrived at a conclusion they were willing to die for. They were both of the same kind. Those who live in death were beings that the Order of Marika, the Order of the Erdtree, had always treated as aberrations, things to be suppressed, contained, returned to a death that the Order considered proper. While the night persisted, that order was suspended. The night had disrupted the structures of the lands between in ways that included the structures that had made the existence of their kind difficult. While the night remained, they wandered and fought, and had something that resembled freedom, however costly the freedom was. If the night ended, the Order of Marika would return, and with it, the suppression. The traitor had not betrayed the Fellowship out of cowardice or self-interest in the ordinary sense. He had betrayed it because the Fellowship's goal, the defeat of the Nightlord and the end of the night, was a goal that served those who already belonged to the order of things, not beings like the Ironeye, not beings like himself. The Fellowship used its scions for the work and would discard them when the work was done, and the world the work was producing was not a world designed for people of their nature. He had wanted a night that never ended. He had wanted the scions, all the beings of his kind, to wander through an endless night, fighting as they were made to fight, without the order of the living bearing down on them from above. It was, he acknowledged, a foolish dream, too large, too dependent on things outside his control. He should never have acted on it, or perhaps never have spoken of it to anyone who could carry the words back to those who would call it treason. He did not ask the Ironeye to agree with him. He asked him, having received what he had been promised, to consider the argument. The letter from Heolstor. After the execution, after the crypt and the edge of order and the traitor's final words, the Ironeye found a letter among his own effects. It was from Heolstor, the custodian. It contained something the custodian had not intended to share in the professional correspondence, a fragment of a different kind of honesty, spoken in frustration, and then walked back in the next letter with an apology and a request to disregard it. The scions raised would wander through an endless night, fighting on and on. A night that would never break for their sake, I desired. She had wanted this too, or had wanted something like it. The custodian whose letters maintained the professional tone of the Fellowship's standard protocol had, in a moment of fatigue or grief, written down the thing the traitor had died for believing. She had wanted the night to continue, not as an end, but as a protection. Not for herself, for the scions she had raised, for the kind of beings that the Fellowship shaped and used and would discard when they were spent. She had told him to forget it. It was pure balderdash, she said. Spoken in frustration, he should free himself of his misgivings and walk the path in which he believed. The Ironeye wrote back. His final letter to her was not the report of an operative concluding a mission. It was a different kind of accounting. You were the finest guardian one could hope for, he wrote. He addressed her not as his custodian, but as his guardian, the word for the person who had made him, rather than the word for the person who directed him. I desired freedom from the yoke of the Fellowship, only because you showed me it was possible. I have only gratitude for you, Master, for now my night shall never end. The choice at the end. When the Nightlord fell and the hold completed its work, a choice waited for the Ironeye, the primordial Nightlord's rune, the object whose destruction would end the night and restore what the night had disrupted. The corpse at the hold's highest point, where the rune was meant to be offered. The restoration of the order of things, or the edge of order still in his hand. The blade that could kill those who live in death. The blade that, turned differently, could kill something else. The Ironeye walked toward the corpse. He did not offer the rune. He clenched the dagger. He completed a different task than the one the Fellowship had sent him to perform. He slit the throat of the body. He turned away. The night's machinery, deprived of the moment that would have ended it, continued. The blood of the creature that had been sustaining the cycle spread across the room as the Ironeye walked back into the hold's interior. The night is far from over, he said. He had retired the traitor as instructed. He had found the edge of order as the traitor required. He had listened to the argument as the traitor had asked. And at the end of it, he had done what the traitor's dream had wanted, but the traitor had not been able to accomplish. He had kept the night. Not forever, perhaps. Not in any way that could be called a solution, but for now. for the science, for the wandering. For now, his night would never end. Sleep well. Tomorrow we reach the final arc, the Executor and the guilt he has carried since the young woman died, and the question of what an honourable death requires. The Executor carries two things that do not belong together, a cursed blade and a brush. The blade is the obvious one. His body has grown into his armour over time, the metal and the flesh having merged in the way that things merge when the boundary between them is no longer maintained. He is a crucible knight, or was, before the prison stint in the lands between that the law records without explaining, before the condemned status that followed him into the hold. A warrior from the land of reeds, which is the eastern territory beyond the lands between, the region whose aesthetic the katana and the fighting discipline and the particular quality of his bearing all reflect. A crucible knight by oath and by nature, sworn to the greater will. The brush is the other thing. He paints. The Erdtree is his subject. The great golden tree that organizes the theology of the lands between, and whose image he has been working toward for years, in the slow accumulative way of someone who is not painting a picture, but attempting to render something that does not sit still on the canvas. He has not completed it. He does not know if he will. Two faces, one sword. A soul drenched in blood, yet willing to face the night. And perhaps, when the night has passed, I will complete the Erdtree. Tonight we follow the Executor and the painter's shed, and the thing he could not do. The land of reeds. The land of reeds is not described at length in the Nightreign lore. It is established through what it produced rather than through any account of the place itself. The Executor came from it. The katana he carries came from it. The discipline that makes him, in the law's own assessment, unrivaled in one-on-one combat while armed with his cursed sword, came from it. It was a foreign place in relation to the lands between, which is why the Executor's presence among the Crucible Knights is notable enough for the law to remark on. He came from elsewhere and swore the oath that Crucible Knight swore: loyalty to the greater will, service to the primordial forces that the Crucible represented, the ancient combat traditions that preceded the age of the Erdtree, while remaining committed to its continuance. A foreigner who adopted the oath and held it no less than any knight born into the tradition. The painting was his private practice. A warrior who paints the Erdtree is someone for whom the theological commitment has a personal dimension that the sword alone does not exhaust. He believed in what he served. The image he kept returning to, the golden tree against whatever sky the canvas held, was not a soldier's propaganda. It was a private act of attention, the kind of attention that takes years of returning to the same subject with the same care. He describes himself in his journal as a painter and warrior both. One face that was the warrior, another that was the painter. One sword that served both. The crucible holds a composite, the journal says, which is the law's way of describing a person who contains more than one thing without those things resolving into a single simpler identity. He was both, and he carried both, and the hold received both when he arrived. The painter. Before the hold, before the prison, before the condemned status that the law records as his entry condition, the Executor was assigned to a painter. The nature of this assignment is not fully preserved. The law gives us the painter's shed, the view of the Erdtree from it, the incomplete painting on the canvas, and the fact that the Executor was there with her. The assignment might have been protective. A crucible knight stationed to guard a person the greater will's servants considered worth guarding. It might have been something else. The law does not settle the relationship into a simple category. What the law preserves is the painter's own record of him. She made a portrait of him, and she wrote about it. A crucible holds a composite. My guest could not bear to render a judgment. Here at the painter's shed, overlooking the Erdtree, until the very end. She called him her guest. The word is careful, not her guardian, not her assigned protector, her guest, someone who had come into her space, into the shed with the view of the Erdtree, and whom she had received as guests are received, with the particular kind of attention that you give to someone whose presence you did not choose, but have come to value. She painted him. He was painting the Erdtree. They were both at work in the shed, overlooking the same tree, producing different accounts of what they saw. The Erdtree painting was still incomplete when the young woman died. What could not be done? The law does not say how she died. It says she was a young lady. It says she died. It says a crucible knight was present. The executor's own account is structured around what he did not do, rather than around what happened. The guilt he carries is the guilt of someone who had a responsibility and did not meet it, not the guilt of someone who caused harm. He was there. She died. He did not prevent it. The crucible knight who came to the shed afterward found the executor in the particular state that follows a failure of this kind. The knight had come to render a judgment, which in the language of the crucible knights meant to execute a sentence. The executor's failure in his duty, or whatever the charge was, had produced a verdict that required execution. The knight could not do it. The law preserves the image. The crucible knight kneeling beside the corpse of the young woman, in the shed with the unfinished Erdtree painting, facing the executor who stood there with what he had not done still visible in everything about him. My guest could not bear to render a judgment, the painter's portrait had said, as though she had known before the moment arrived that this would be what it came to. The knight who came to execute him could not do it either. He knelt. He did not raise his sword. The executor had to do it himself. Seppuku. Seppuku is the ritual act of self-execution practiced in the tradition of the land of reeds. It is not suicide in the ordinary sense. It is the warrior's response to a situation in which death is required, and the capacity to meet it with honor is the only thing that remains. The blade is turned inward. The act is deliberate and prepared for and carried out with the same attention to form that any other execution would require. The executor performed it. He did not die. The law records this as a fact without elaborating on the mechanism. A condemned soul, his description says, a body fused with pieces of armor, which is the physical expression of what the crucible produces in those who are fully within its nature. The crucible holds a composite, and the composite endures past the moment that should end it, because what the crucible binds does not unbind easily. He performed the act. The act was complete. He did not die, and the not dying is one of the quieter horrors the Nightreign law produces, because it means he is carrying the act with him. The attempt was genuine. The guilt was genuine. The blade was genuine. And the death it was intended to produce did not come. He went missing afterward, which is what the official record says. A prison stint in the lands between, which is what followed. And then the hold, which is where the missing people went when they had been called to fight the night. The executor's cry. His remembrance visits what he has not resolved. The executor's cry, the name given to the entity that appears in his final remembrance, is an exact image of himself. The same body, the same moves, the same fighting discipline. The image of the executor in the state the failure produced. He fights it. which is to say he fights what the painter's death made him, the version of himself that could not prevent it, and had to carry that inability forward through the seppuku that did not take, and the prison that followed, and the hold that came after. He wins. The fight is not about the painter, or about the young woman, or about the crucible knight who could not render judgment. It is about what the Executor has been able to do with what he carries. The sword that has served both faces, the soul drenched in blood that chose to face the night, rather than continue in the static state of someone who failed once and stopped. After the fight, the remembrance takes him back to the painter's shed. The shed is there. The Erdtree is there beyond the window, and the painting is where she left it, incomplete on the canvas. The crucible knight is kneeling beside the young woman's body, the same image that the painter's words had prepared him for before the moment arrived. He interacts with the crucible knight. He watches the seppuku performed. This time, in the remembrance's logic, the execution is complete, not his. The crucible knights performed in the same tradition, with the same blade, for the same weight of failure that the Executor had been carrying alone. Then he returns to the hold. The incomplete painting, the Erdtree painting, is still unfinished. The lore preserves this as the final fact of the Executor's story, not as tragedy, but as something that remains. He has been in the lands between, in the prison, in the hold. He has fought the night and will fight it again. And the canvas in the shed has the unfinished tree on it, the same tree he has been working toward in his private practice since before any of this began. When the night has passed, his journal says, perhaps then he will complete it. The perhaps is honest. He does not know if the night will pass in any way that leaves him in a condition to return to the shed and the canvas and the view of the Erdtree. He does not know what the hold's work will cost him, or whether a condemned soul whose seppuku did not take has a future that includes something as quiet as painting. But the intention is there. The two faces and the one sword, the composite that the crucible holds together. The warrior who fights, and the painter who returns to the same subject with the same care, year after year, because the subject deserves it. He has not given that up. The blade that faced inward and did not end him left him with the question of what to do next, and the answer he arrived at was, face the night. And after the night, if there is an after, complete the Erdtree. Sleep well. Tomorrow the last of the Nightfarers, and the whole shape as a whole, and what 8 people who were already finished found when the night called them together. The Undertaker arrived at the Roundtable Hold, carrying a condition she had never been able to name without the name causing trouble. She was hungry. Not in the way that a person is hungry after a long journey or a day without food. In the way that some bodies are made. A constitutional hunger. A requirement built into what she was that demanded flesh and blood at regular intervals, or the consequences arrived without mercy. The shakes. The pain that built toward delirium. The moment once, when the refusal had gone on long enough that she had bitten her own arm without awareness of doing it. Since then, she had not tried to refuse again. The monastery had kept her because she was useful, and had sent her away because she was frightening. An abbess with uncanny strength and a hunger that the other children had sensed before they understood it, that the adults had understood before they knew what to do with it. She had been assigned the work of burying the dead, which was the work that gave her regular access to what she needed and kept her away from the living. And then, the monastery had sent her to the lands between to slay the Nightlord, because it was the kind of task that solved 2 problems at once. The Nightlord might be slain, and the Undertaker might not return. She came to the hold. She managed the hunger as she had always managed it. And then she found, in the course of the expeditions, that the residue of the night had a quality her body could process. It tasted nothing like what she needed. It was a poor substitute, unpleasant in the way that all substitutes are unpleasant when you know exactly what is being substituted. But it worked. The hunger quieted. The shakes did not come. She began consuming the night's residue in the hold's quieter corners, in private, because the condition that made her useful to the monastery was the same condition that had made her frightening to everyone who had ever known about it. The scholar found her. The glass. The scholar was the other late arrival to the hold, the second of the Nightfarers added after the original 8, and his own history was built around a different kind of condition, a weakness that the cleansing tear had been unable to address. He had carried the tear hoping it would help him. It had not. And when he found the Undertaker feeding on the night's residue in one of the hold's dark corners, he made her a proposal. Keep the secret and take the tear. The Undertaker held the glass he gave her. The law preserves her thought. I feel a calmness when holding the glass he gave me. Perhaps this will help me overcome the hunger, without feasting on the succor of night. The cleansing tear had not resolved the scholar's condition. He had given it away to someone else's need, which is the kind of generosity that arises from having exhausted one's own use for something. He had accepted that his weakness was his to carry. She had not yet accepted that her hunger was hers, and the glass was the thing that made the not yet into a possible. The Undertaker's remembrance does not end with a resolution. It ends with the glass in her hand, and the question of whether the hunger can be faced differently than it has been faced before. The path to peace had been offered, she writes in her journal's final entry, and the sacrifices would be worth it. For her, with little else but bloodshed to call a talent, perhaps she had found a purpose. She had come to believe it now. What Heolstor was. The night that covered Limveld had a source, and the source had a history. Heolstor the Nightlord, the primordial expression of the night, the final opponent that the Hold's work was building toward, had not always been what he became. The lore of the night's origin is preserved in fragments, in the item descriptions and the environmental details that From Software builds its deepest truths into, and the fragments point toward a specific catastrophe. After the shattering, after the wars between the demigods that Queen Marika's shattering of the Elden Ring had produced, the lands between was left in disorder. No victor, no restored order. A world thrown into the aftermath of a conflict that had destroyed everything the conflict had been fought over. A man survived who should not have. He had been beneath the others, buried or trapped or simply overlooked in the way that some people are overlooked when the catastrophe is large enough. He crawled out. He was alive, and everything he had failed to protect was gone. He cursed the world. The law gives this act the simplicity it deserves. A man who survived the unsurvivable, who found that survival had left him with nothing, who cursed the world for what surviving had cost him. The night came from that curse, the great rain of darkness that poured from the sky. Heolstor, the man who had crawled out from under the dead, had become the Nightlord. The Nightfarers that the Hold assembled were called to address a catastrophe that had begun as grief. The night was not an evil that had existed before the world. It was what one person's inability to bear what they had survived had produced, scaled up to something that covered the sky. The table. The Roundtable Hold assembled 8 people, and then 2 more, and set them to work against the night. What it assembled was not a company of heroes. The Wylder, the last of a clan, who had lost everyone at Windwail Knoll and found his sister in the same building she had been waiting in since before he arrived. The Duchess, the righteous thief, who had left the knoll on her own business and arrived at the hold first, and had been holding the centre ever since, waiting for the brother she could not quite remember, the Guardian, the last of his regiment, flying in formation now on the ground instead of in the sky, with a wing that could no longer open, and a teacher whose knowledge had built the weapon that closed it, the Recluse, who had been looking for a dead woman who was not dead, and a child who was not a child, and who had healed the wing while carrying the history of why the wing had been hurt. The raider, who had sailed from the coastal waters to find a worthy opponent and had found the hold instead, and inside the hold eventually found the opponent he had been looking for, wearing the helmet he had taken from him years before. The Revenant, who had been a doll the whole time, brought to life by a girl's last moment of feeling, carrying the girl's memories in a body that had never been alive before that night. The Ironeye, who had come to execute a traitor and found the traitor was himself, and who, in the end, had executed the night's ending instead of letting it proceed. The Executor, 2 faces and 1 sword, with an unfinished painting and a seppuku that had not taken, and a return to work that meant facing the night, rather than finding somewhere quiet to carry the failure in private. The Undertaker, who buried the dead and had been sent to end the night by people who hoped she would not return. The Scholar, who had a weakness and a cleansing tear he could not use, and a habit of finding the people in the hold's dark corners and offering what he had. The Iron Menial, who had been there before any of them and would know what each of them needed and would find the way to show them, in the patient manner of someone who has been caring for people for longer than any of them have been alive. The hold asked nothing of them except that they do the work. It did not require them to be whole. It did not require them to have resolved what they had come from. It required them to fight the night, and in the doing of that, some of what they had come carrying found a direction it had not had before. What ended? When Heolstor fell, the primordial Nightlord's rune passed to the Nightfarers who had defeated him. The hold brought them back to itself, and the hold in that moment was the last version of itself, crumbling grey, the water replaced by ash, the building reduced to what buildings are reduced to when their purpose is ending. The corpse at the hold's highest point was waiting. The corpse was Heolstor, as he had been before the curse, before the night, before the man who had crawled out from under the dead and found that surviving had cost him everything. The rune returned to the body. The night's machinery, deprived of the cause that had set it running, stopped. The Nightfarers dissolved into strands of grace. The law's description of this is gentle. They returned to the Erdtree, the great golden tree at the center of the lands between's theology, in the form of the light that the Erdtree had always been associated with. They had been called to do something, and they had done it, and the ending that the whole produced was the kind of ending that looks like release when the work is finished. The Duchess had made arrangements for the Wylder. The whole's dissolution would take her with it. But she had asked the Iron Menial to bridge what remained of her brother to the outside world, to bless the object he carried so that something of the connection between them persisted past the moment the whole dissolved. The brooch, or the earring, the small thing that the clan had used to promise to fight side by side, wherever they were separated by land or sea. The hold had kept them together for the duration of the work. That was what it had been built to do. What the hold was. The Roundtable Hold was a building that assembled the people it needed and cared for them in the specific ways each of them required, and sent them out against the night, and received them back, and did this across however many expeditions and however many forays the work demanded. The iron menial had been the Hold's continuous presence throughout. He had received the Duchess first, with anticipation, because the Hold had been waiting for her. He had received the others as they came. He had known what Wylder needed to find in the study. He had known what the Raider needed from the tourney. He had known what the Guardian needed from the confrontation in the garden, and what the Recluse needed from the search through the Hold's dark corners, and what the Ironeye needed from the execution in the crypt. He had known what the Undertaker needed when she was found feeding in the shadows, and he had known to let her keep the secret until she was ready to release it, and to bring her the Scholar's glass at the moment when the glass could do what it was meant to do. The Hold was not a gathering of people who chose each other. They were called. The call went to people who were finished with their previous lives in one way or another, who had arrived at the place where what they had been doing had run out of road. The Wylder with his sea of gravestones. The Duchess already inside, waiting, tending to the Hold's centre with no particular place else to be. The Guardian with his ruined wing and his old flock gone. The Recluse with her dead teacher who was not dead. The Raider with his beloved helmet and his unfound rival. The Revenant with a girlhood that had not been hers and a purpose that was. The Ironeye with his order and his double, and the question of what that order was actually for. The Executor with his blade and his brush and his seppuku that had not finished what it started. The Hold called them because they were the ones who could be called. People who were still moving, still carrying what they carried, still fighting, though the thing they had been fighting for or against or through was gone. The night asked for the same thing the Hold asked for, to keep going, to face what was in front of you, to bring what you had, however reduced, and use it for the work at hand. They did. The night is over. The Hold dissolves. The strands of grace return to the tree that was always there, waiting, in every painting the Executor ever made of it. This has been the entire lore of Elden Ring Nightreign, told slowly, over 8 nights. The Hold, the Nightlords, the 8 people who were called to fight them, with everything they were carrying and nothing to set it down on, for the quiet between waking and whatever waits in the dark. Good night, my dear friend.